I never thought I'd find myself back here, but there I was, standing in front of the Grand Oak Hall, the place where my stepfather, Richard, was throwing yet another self-congratulatory gala. The sign outside read "Celebrating Excellence in Leadership." Of course, Richard would find a way to celebrate himself while dragging everyone else down. I adjusted my tie, my fingers twitching with unease. The air was thick with polished arrogance, and the sound of clinking glasses echoed through the night. I took a deep breath, plastered on my best polite smile, and stepped inside. The room was packed. Old neighbors, distant relatives, and people I barely recognized mingled, all basking in Richard's glow. I spotted my mother, Margaret, across the room. She looked poised, elegant as always, but her eyes barely acknowledged me. "Evan!" A familiar, syrupy voice called out. I turned and there she was, Hannah, my stepsister. "I didn't think you'd show up." "Surprise," I murmured, forcing a smile. Hannah was all smiles and perfectly rehearsed charm, but I knew better. Behind that polished exterior was the same girl who used to make sure I knew exactly where I stood in this family beneath her and Oscar. "Mom will be thrilled," she added, her eyes flickering with something I couldn't quite place. "Sure," I muttered, my stomach tightening. I scanned the room, searching for an escape route, but my gaze landed on Richard. He was holding court near the bar, laughing loudly, his hand on Oscar's shoulder. They looked like the picture-perfect family. And I was the afterthought, the outsider. I clenched my jaw, reminding myself that I was here for one reason: to show my face and leave as quickly as possible. But deep down I had a sinking feeling that this night wouldn't go as planned. I hadn't been inside for more than 10 minutes before the familiar feeling of being out of place settled in. The air buzzed with meaningless small talk, the kind where people exchanged pleasantries while secretly judging everyone around them. I made my way to the bar, hoping to get a drink and avoid as much conversation as possible. But before I could even order, I heard Richard's booming voice echo across the room. "Ah, Evan, there he is." Heads turned. I froze, plastering on a tight smile as I turned to face him. Richard strode over, his grin wide and confident. He clapped me on the back like we were old pals, but the force behind it was just a little too much like a reminder of who was really in charge. "Didn't think you'd make it," he said, his tone dripping with fake warmth. "Wouldn't miss it," I replied, though we both knew that was a lie. "Busy with that little project of yours?" His smile tightened, and I felt the heat rise in my chest. Project. That's what he called my restaurant, as if the years I'd poured into building it from the ground up were nothing more than a side hobby. "Actually, it's doing really well," I said, keeping my tone even. "We just expanded the outdoor seating last month." "Good for you," he said, but his eyes had already shifted, scanning the room for someone more important. And just like that, I was dismissed. I turned back to the bar, but before I could take a sip of my drink, I heard another voice. "Still playing chef, huh?" I didn't need to turn around to know it was Oscar. I sighed, taking a steadying breath before facing him. Oscar stood there, drink in hand, flashing that same smug grin he'd always worn. "I heard you've got a cute little spot downtown. Must be fun." "It's more than fun," I said calmly. "It's a business, a successful one." "Sure," he drawled, taking a sip of his whiskey. "But I mean, it's not real success, right?" My jaw clenched. I'd spent years working 16-hour days, sacrificing sleep, relationships, and comfort to make that restaurant thrive. And yet, in their eyes, it would never compare to the corporate ladder climbing that Richard had orchestrated for Hannah and Oscar. Speaking of Hannah, she glided over just in time to chime in. "Evan," she purred, her smile all teeth. "We were just talking about you. Did you hear? Oscar's been offered a partnership at Dad's firm." Of course, he had. I swallowed down the bitter taste rising in my throat. "Congrats," I said, my voice hollow. "Thanks," Oscar said, barely hiding his smirk. "But enough about me. Tell us more about your little restaurant." I opened my mouth, but Hannah cut me off. "Oh, I heard they're doing farm to table now," she said, her tone dripping with fake enthusiasm. "So trendy these days." I felt my fingers tighten around my glass. Every word, every look, every passive-aggressive comment was designed to remind me exactly where I stood. Outsider, failure, the one who didn't follow the plan. "Excuse me," I said, forcing a polite smile as I stepped away. I needed air. As I slipped through the crowd, I felt the weight of their judgment pressing down on me. No matter how much I accomplished, it was never enough for them. And deep down, I knew something was coming. The tension in the air was too thick. Richard wasn't done with me yet. I had just escaped to the balcony, hoping for a moment of peace. The cool night air brushed against my face, calming the heat that had been building in my chest all evening. I could still hear the muffled conversations and polite laughter coming from inside the hall, but out here, I could breathe. I leaned against the railing, staring out at the city lights. My restaurant wasn't far from here, just a few blocks down. I built that place from scratch, brick by brick. And yet, inside that crowded room, none of it seemed to matter. "Evan," a familiar voice called behind me. I turned, and there was Uncle Mike, the only person in that room who had ever really been on my side. "You okay?" he asked, his brows furrowed with concern. I gave him a small, tired smile. Same old, same old." Mike nodded, leaning beside me. "They haven't changed, huh?" "Not a bit," I murmured. "Look, I know you came here for your mom," he said softly. "But if this is too much, I'm fine." I cut him off, but even I didn't believe it. "Evan," he started, but before he could finish, the sound of clinking glasses echoed from inside. "Time for speeches," I muttered under my breath. Mike gave me a sympathetic look. "You don't have to stay." But I did, because no matter how much they dismissed me, a part of me still wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, tonight would be different. Inside the hall, I slipped back into the crowded room just as Richard took the stage. He stood behind the podium, a glass of champagne in hand, and flashed that signature smile of his, the one that could charm an entire room while simultaneously tearing someone down. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying effortlessly across the hall. "Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate what has truly been an incredible year." Applause echoed through the room. I kept to the sidelines, hoping to remain invisible. "As many of you know," Richard continued, "this year has been filled with milestones. Hannah's engagement, Oscar's partnership, more applause. Hannah and Oscar beamed, soaking in the praise. And of course," Richard added, his tone shifting ever so slightly, "we can't forget about Evan." My stomach dropped. All eyes turned to me. Richard's smile was too tight now, his eyes glinting with barely concealed amusement. "Evan," he said, motioning toward me, "has been keeping busy with his little restaurant." A few polite chuckles rippled through the crowd. My jaw clenched. "He's been working hard, folks," Richard continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "I mean, who knew you could make a living flipping burgers and serving salads?" Laughter erupted. My ears burned. I felt Mike stiffen beside me. "Evan's been so passionate about his project," Richard went on, his words laced with mock sincerity. "It's inspiring, really, to see someone follow their dreams, no matter how small." The laughter grew louder. I could feel the blood pounding in my ears. My fingers curled into fists at my sides, but I forced myself to stay still. "Of course," Richard added, his grin widening. "We all know that passion doesn't always pay the bills. But hey, at least he's doing what he loves, right?" More laughter. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. I could feel my heart pounding each beat, echoing louder than the laughter around me. I glanced toward my mother, hoping for something, a glance, a sign, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. She just stood there, her lips pressed into a thin line. I was alone. Again, the moment everything changed. The room was spinning, and for a moment, I thought about walking out. But then I heard something, a laugh. Not just any laugh, Richard's. That smug, satisfied chuckle as he raised his glass in my direction. And something inside me snapped. No, not this time. I straightened my spine, my jaw tightening as I took a step forward. "Actually," I said, my voice louder than I intended. The laughter died instantly. All eyes were on me now. "Actually, Richard, the first repeated, forcing a smile as I strode toward the podium. I'd love to say a few words. A ripple of murmurs swept through the crowd as I took the microphone from his hand. Richard's smile faltered, but he quickly masked it with his usual charm. "Of course, Evan," he said smoothly, stepping aside. I turned to face the room. For a moment, I just stood there, letting the silence stretch, letting them wonder. Then I smiled. "I just wanted to thank Richard for his kind words," I began, my tone light but firm, "and for reminding me and all of us what true success looks like." Richard's eyes narrowed slightly. "Because, you see," I continued, my gaze sweeping over the crowd, "success isn't measured by how many people you impress at a gala." A few people shifted uncomfortably. "It's not about partnerships, or promotions, or titles." I let that hang in the air for a moment before I went on. "Success," I said, my voice steady, "is about building something real, something that matters, something that makes a difference." I could see a few heads nodding now. "Success," I added, my eyes locking onto Richard's, "is about doing what you love, even when people like Richard think it's beneath them." The room was deathly silent. "And by that measure," I said, my smile widening just a little, "I'd say I'm doing just fine." For a moment, no one moved, no one spoke, and then Uncle Mike started clapping. It was slow at first, but then a few others joined in. I didn't wait for the applause to grow. I turned, handed the microphone back to Richard, and walked off the stage. But not before I caught the look on his face. It was priceless. Walking away from it all. I didn't wait for the rest of the speeches. I didn't need to. As I walked toward the exit, I felt lighter than I had in years. I had said my piece. I had taken back my power. And for the first time, I wasn't walking away in defeat. I was walking towards something better. Walking out of that gala felt like shedding a weight I had been carrying for years. The cool night air hit my face, but this time, it didn't sting. It felt freeing. But even as I walked toward my car, a familiar voice echoed in the back of my mind. "You're just playing with your little restaurant, flipping burgers and serving salads." Richard's words, his laughter, the humiliation. I clenched my jaw, my fingers tightening around my car keys. I could have left it at that. I had spoken my piece, taken my stand, and walked out with my head held high. But walking away wasn't enough. Not this time. Because people like Richard didn't learn from words. They needed something more. They needed consequences. The plan takes shape by the time I got home that night. My mind was racing. I paced across my living room, running through everything Richard had ever done to put me down, every comment, every dig, every effort to make me feel small. But I wasn't that kid anymore. I built my restaurant from the ground up. I had a loyal team, a growing reputation, and more community support than Richard could ever buy. That's when it hit me. Richard thrived on control. He liked having his fingers in every pie business, politics, even local charities. But there was one thing he cared about more than anything: reputation. If I wanted to hit him where it hurt, I needed to take that away from him. So I started making calls. Step 1, the quiet setup. The next morning, I met with a friend of mine, Jake, who worked in real estate. Jake owed me a favor. I had catered his wedding for free when he was just starting out, and he was more than happy to return it. "Richard's been trying to buy up those lots near the waterfront, right?" I asked, leaning back in my chair at the cafe. Jake nodded, sipping his coffee. "Yeah, he's been eyeing them for months. Wants to develop some high-end condos." "Perfect," I said, a slow grin spreading across my face. "Why?" Jake's eyes narrowed with curiosity. "Because I'm about to make sure that never happens," Jake smirked. "I'm listening." Step 2, taking control. It took a few weeks, but piece by piece, I quietly started acquiring the small, overlooked properties near the waterfront. A family-run bakery, a little antique shop, even an empty lot that most people had forgotten about. Richard was too focused on the big-ticket properties to notice the smaller ones. By the time he realized what was happening, I owned just enough of the land to block any future development he had planned. And I wasn't done yet. Step 3, the grand opening. I waited for the perfect moment to strike. Richard was hosting another event this time, a charity fundraiser for the local business community. Everyone who was anyone would be there. Politicians, business owners, media outlets. I made sure I was on the guest list. I didn't plan on making a speech this time. No, this time I had a better plan. I showed up with a surprise. "Evan," Richard's voice greeted me the moment I stepped through the door. But this time, there was a slight edge to it. He was still smiling, but his eyes were scanning me, trying to figure out why I was there. "Richard," the first said smoothly, shaking his hand. "Quite the turnout tonight." "Always," he replied. But there was tension behind his words. He knew something was off. And he was right. Step 4. The big reveal. The moment came about halfway through the evening. I waited until Richard was mid-conversation with a group of local investors people. He was trying to woo for his waterfront project. That's when I casually walked over, holding a glass of champagne and a perfectly timed smile. "Richard," the first said, loud enough for the investors to hear, "I just wanted to thank you for inspiring me." His smile froze. "Inspiring you?" "Yeah," I said, savoring the moment. "You always said I should think bigger, so I did." I pulled out a small folder and handed it to one of the investors. "What's this?" the man asked, flipping through the documents. "Just some recent acquisitions," I said casually, watching Richard's expression shift from mild curiosity to full-blown panic. The investor's eyes widened. "Wait, this is the waterfront area." Richard's face paled. "Evan," he hissed, his voice barely above a whisper. "What did you do?" I smiled. "Just business, Richard," the first said smoothly. "I own those properties now, which means any development plans you had." I gave a small shrug. "They're dead in the water." The color drained from his face. I turned to the investors, who were already whispering among themselves. "Oh," I added with a grin, "and I'm turning one of the lots into a second location for my restaurant. Should be open by summer." The investors looked impressed. "Richard?" He looked like he was about to explode. Step 5, the final blow. By the time the evening ended, the damage was done. Word spread fast. Richard's project was dead, and the investors he had been trying to impress were already pulling out. And just like that, his reputation, the thing he had spent years building, was crumbling. I didn't need to stick around to watch it happen. I had bigger things to focus on. Walking away on my own terms. As I walked out of that event, I didn't feel anger. I felt free. For the first time, I wasn't walking away because I had been pushed out. I was walking away because I had taken control. I had built something for myself, and no amount of Richard's money or influence could take that away from me. I drove home that night, windows down, the cool night air filling my lungs. And for the first time in a long time, I was at peace. It had been 6 months since I walked out of that fundraiser. 6 months since I watched Richard's carefully curated empire begin to crumble. And 6 months since I finally took back control of my life. I didn't look back. Not once. Instead, I poured everything I had into my restaurant. A new chapter begins. When I opened Evan's Table 5 years ago, I had no idea what I was getting into. I just knew I wanted something of my own, something real. I had spent years watching Richard manipulate and control everyone around him, and I was determined never to let that happen to me. The restaurant had started as a modest little spot downtown, serving comfort food made with fresh, locally sourced ingredients. I didn't have investors or fancy connections. I just had a vision and a hell of a lot of grit. But after that night at the fundraiser, after I secured the waterfront property, everything changed. Expanding the dream, acquiring the waterfront lot, wasn't just about stopping Richard. It was about growing. The new location was everything I had dreamed of: an open-air patio overlooking the water, a space for live music on weekends, and a cozy indoor dining area that felt like home. I poured my heart and soul into that place, working day and night to make it perfect. And when we finally opened the doors, the response was overwhelming. Opening night was packed. People came from all over town, some curious, some just looking for a good meal. But by the end of the night, I could see it in their faces. They weren't just here for the food. They were here because they believed in what I had built. community support and recognition. Word spread fast. Within weeks, Evan's table became the talk of the town. Local food bloggers were raving about the farm-to-table concept, and customers were lining up around the block. But the best part? The community. People weren't just coming for the food, they were coming because they saw how much I cared about this town. I partnered with local farms to source ingredients, hired high school students looking for work experience, and even started hosting monthly charity dinners where proceeds went to local causes. I had built more than just a restaurant. I had built a community. Richard's downfall. While Evan's table was thriving, Richard's world was falling apart. The failed waterfront project had cost him more than just money. Investors pulled out. Business deals went south. And as much as Richard tried to spin the narrative, people saw through it. His reputation, once untouchable, was now in shambles. I didn't gloat. Okay, maybe just a little. But the truth was, I didn't need to rub it in. Richard's own arrogance had been his downfall. And the best part? I didn't have to lift a finger. A surprise visit from Margaret. I hadn't heard from my mother, Margaret, since the night of the gala. She hadn't called, she hadn't texted, and honestly, I hadn't expected her to. So, when she showed up at the restaurant one afternoon, I was caught completely off guard. "Evan," she said softly, standing just inside the entrance. She looked tired, smaller somehow. "Mom," I said, wiping my hands on a towel and stepping out from behind the counter. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I heard about the new place," she said, her eyes scanning the restaurant. "It's beautiful, thanks," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. She hesitated, her hands fidgeting with the strap of her purse. "I'm proud of you," she said quietly. I felt something twist in my chest, but I kept my expression steady. "Are you?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time in years, I saw something real. Regret. "I am," she whispered. "And I'm sorry, Evan, for everything." I wanted to believe her, but words were easy. "Why now?" I asked, crossing my arms. She swallowed hard. "Because I realized that I lost you, and I don't want that." The air between us was heavy with unspoken pain. "I don't know if we can fix this," I said honestly. "I know," she whispered, "but I'd like to try." Closure, not reconciliation. I didn't give her an answer that day. I told her I needed time. And I meant it. For years, I had been chasing her approval, bending over backward to be the son she wanted. But that night at the gala, I had let go of that need. I wasn't seeking her validation anymore. I had built something for myself, and whether or not she was part of my life moving forward, that was up to me. The grand opening of the new location a month later, Evan's Table, Waterfront, had its grand opening. The turnout was incredible, more than I could have ever imagined. Uncle Mike was there, front and center, grinning like a proud parent. "Look at you," he said, clapping me on the back. "You did it, kid," I smiled, taking in the sight of people filling the space I had dreamed of for so long. "Yeah," I murmured, my chest swelling with pride. "I did." A toast to new beginnings. As the night wound down, I stood at the front of the restaurant, a glass of champagne in hand. "Can I have everyone's attention?" I called out, and the chatter quieted. "Thank you all for being here tonight," I began, my voice steady. "This place, it's more than just a restaurant. It's a symbol of what's possible when you believe in yourself. When you refuse to let anyone tell you what you're worth." I glanced around the room, meeting the eyes of the people who had stood by me, who had believed in me when no one else did. "And tonight," I continued, "I want to raise a glass to new beginnings." Everyone lifted their glasses. "To new beginnings," they echoed. As I took a sip, I felt something settle deep inside me. It wasn't just the satisfaction of success. It was peace, moving forward on my terms. Life wasn't perfect. My relationship with my mom was still complicated. Richard was still licking his wounds, probably plotting his next move, but none of that mattered anymore. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't living for anyone else's approval. I was living for me. And that was worth more than anything money or status could ever buy. Epilogue. True success. A year later, Evan's Table, Waterfront was thriving. The original location was still going strong, and I had plans to open a third spot by the end of the year. People started recognizing me around town, not as Richard's stepson or Margaret's disappointment. They knew me as Evan, the guy who built something from nothing, the guy who didn't give up. And as I stood in the doorway of my restaurant, watching the sunset reflect off the water, I realized something. I hadn't just built a business. I had built a life that was mine, and I wouldn't trade that for anything. Story 2. I was standing by the kitchen sink, rinsing out my coffee mug when I got the call. It was my mom. I could tell by her tone that this wasn't going to be a casual chat. "Liam," she said, her voice dripping with that practiced concern. "You know how much this means to Haley." There it was. The subtle guilt trip disguised as motherly affection. I didn't even need her to finish. I already knew where this conversation was heading. My younger sister, Haley, had just been accepted into her dream university. The entire family was treating it like she had just discovered the cure for cancer. Our parents were beyond proud. And Haley? She was already acting like she had secured a seat on the Forbes 30 under 30 list. "Mom," I said, keeping my tone calm, "I'm happy for her, but she's worked so hard for this," she interrupted, completely ignoring what I was about to say. "You're in a good position now, Liam. You could help her a little, couldn't you?" Good position? I barely had enough to keep myself afloat. I worked full-time as a mechanic and picked up shifts at a friend's auto shop on weekends to save up for a down payment on a house. But sure, to my family, that somehow translated to rolling in money. Still, Haley was my sister. At first, I told myself that helping her out here and there wouldn't hurt. I chipped in for her textbooks and sent her some money for groceries every now and then. Nothing major. But that was just the beginning. The slippery slope of sacrifice. Before I knew it, my small contributions turned into me covering her rent, utility bills, and even her random weekend getaways. Every time she called, it was the same routine. "Liam," she'd say sweetly, "I'm so stressed out. I just need a little break." And like a fool, I'd send her money. Every single time. I kept telling myself it was temporary. I convinced myself that once she got settled, she'd realize how much I was sacrificing and maybe, just maybe, show a little gratitude. But no. Instead, Haley's entitlement grew like a weed. She flaunted her lifestyle all over social media, posting pictures of designer bags, fancy brunches, and weekend spa getaways. All of it funded by me, while I was eating ramen for dinner and skipping meals to make ends meet. The worst part? My parents acted like this was completely normal. Family supports family, my mom would remind me, as if my life was meant to revolve around Haley's comfort. I was burning the candle at both ends, working 2 jobs, skipping sleep, and putting my dreams on hold, all so Haley could pretend she was living some glamorous life. And what did I get in return? Silence. Not once did she ask how I was doing or acknowledge the sacrifices I was making. The breaking point. I thought things might get better. Once Haley settled into university life, I assumed she'd gain some perspective. But no, her demands only escalated. Then came the moment that finally broke me. "Liam," Haley chirped over the phone one evening, her tone as casual as if she was asking for a cup of sugar. "I've been thinking, I really want to do a semester abroad. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." My grip tightened on my phone. "And who's supposed to pay for that, Haley?" "Oh, come on," she laughed, like it was a joke. "You've always figured things out. You'll make it work." I stood there, stunned. She didn't even ask if I could afford it. She just assumed I'd find a way like I always did. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Haley," I said slowly, "maybe it's time you get a part-time job." The silence that followed was deafening. "Me? A job?" She actually laughed. "Liam, I'm way too busy with school. I can't juggle that." And that was it. The final straw. A dinner that changed everything. The real turning point came at a family dinner a few weeks later. I didn't even want to go, but I figured I could stomach a few hours of polite conversation. Big mistake. Haley was home for a short break, and my parents were doting on her like she was royalty. They were asking about her coursework, her friends, whether she needed anything for school. Meanwhile, I sat there, invisible, like I was just an afterthought. Then, in the middle of dinner, Haley casually brought up her study abroad plans. "It's going to be amazing," she gushed, practically glowing. "But it's a bit pricey." She turned toward me with a smug smile. "I hope you're ready to work a little harder, big brother." I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. I couldn't believe the audacity. She didn't even ask. She just expected me to fund another chapter of her extravagant life. "Maybe," I said, keeping my tone as neutral as possible. "You should consider getting a part-time job." Haley laughed. "Me? A part-time job? That's hilarious. I'm way too busy." The room went dead silent. My parents stared at me like I had just committed a crime. "You're kidding, right?" I asked, setting my fork down. Haley's expression shifted from amused to annoyed. "Why are you being so dramatic?" That was it. I was done. "Enough is enough. I'm not being dramatic, Haley," I said, my voice finally firm. "I've been supporting you for years. I've sacrificed everything, my time, my money, my dreams, so you can live in comfort while I barely get by. And now you want me to pay for a semester abroad? Are you serious?" My mother gasped like I had just slapped someone at the table. "Liam," she started, her voice laced with disapproval. "She's your sister. It's your duty to help her." "Duty?" I let out a humorless laugh. "When did it become my duty to put my entire life on hold so Haley can do whatever she wants?" Haley rolled her eyes. "Here we go again," she muttered under her breath. "No," I said, standing up. "I'm done. I'm not paying another dime for her. Not her rent, not her tuition, nothing." The silence that followed was thick enough to cut with a knife. My parents stared at me in disbelief, and for the first time, Haley looked genuinely caught off guard. "You can't just abandon me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Figure it out," I said, grabbing my jacket. "I've been doing it for years. Maybe it's time you learned how." And with that, I walked out. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. But I also knew this was just the beginning. The fallout was coming, and it was going to be brutal. My phone started buzzing before I even had a chance to finish my first cup of coffee. I glanced at the screen. It was Haley. I ignored it. Then came the texts. "Wow. Thanks for ruining dinner, Liam. Do you even care what happens to me? You're really just going to let your little sister suffer? Suffer? Really?" The girl who had been living like a Kardashian on my dime was suddenly playing the victim? I rolled my eyes and turned off notifications. I wasn't falling for that, but Haley wasn't about to let it go that easily. She switched tactics, bombarding me with guilt. "Mom and Dad are so disappointed. You've always been selfish. I should have known you'd bail when things got tough. I can't believe you're doing this to family." I clenched my jaw, fighting the urge to respond. I wanted to tell her exactly how selfish I had been working 2 jobs, skipping meals, putting my own life on hold, but I knew it wouldn't matter. She wasn't interested in hearing the truth. She just wanted to manipulate me back into submission. Not this time. Round 2, Mom's emotional blackmail. When ignoring Haley didn't work, my mom stepped in. She called that afternoon, her voice dripping with disappointment. "Liam," she began, her tone soft but laced with that familiar guilt. "What's gotten into you? Haley needs you. She's your sister." "I've been there for her, Mom," I said, keeping my voice calm. "For years. But I can't keep doing this. I'm drowning. She's just trying to build a future," she said, like I hadn't already heard that line 1,000 times. "You've always been the responsible one. I thought you'd understand. Being responsible doesn't mean being taken advantage of," I replied. "I'm done, Mom. She's an adult. She can figure it out." The silence that followed was deafening. "I don't know who you've become," she whispered finally, "but this isn't the Liam I raised. That one stung. I won't lie, but I held my ground. I'm the same Liam, Mom," I said softly. "I'm just tired of being used." Round 3, Dad's attempt at tough love. I thought maybe, just maybe, my dad would see reason, but nope. He called that evening, his voice thick with frustration. "You're being completely unreasonable," he said without so much as a hello. "You know how hard this has been on Haley." I took a deep breath, already bracing myself. "Dad, I've been supporting her for years. I've done everything I could, but I can't keep sacrificing my life for hers. Family doesn't turn its back, he snapped. What's she supposed to do now? Get a job, I said bluntly. Like the rest of us. There was a pause. I could practically hear his blood pressure rising. Don't be ridiculous, he muttered. She's got too much on her plate. And I didn't? I shot back. Dad, I worked 2 jobs to keep her comfortable. I skipped meals. I gave up on buying a house so she could live her dream. And what did I get in return? Nothing. Not even a thank you. His silence spoke volumes. You're punishing her, he finally said. His voice softer now, but still clinging to the old narrative. No, Dad, I said quietly. I'm just finally standing up for myself. When reality hits hard, the next few days were blissfully quiet. For the first time in years, I wasn't constantly checking my phone, waiting for the next demand or guilt trip. I was free, but I knew it wouldn't last. A week later, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but curiosity got the better of me. Hello? Hi, is this Liam? A man asked. Yeah, who's this? This is Josh, the landlord for Haley's apartment. I've been trying to reach her, but she's not responding. Rent is overdue, and I was told you're the one who handles payments. I blinked, stunned. Not anymore, I said firmly. You'll have to take that up with Haley. There was a beat of awkward silence. Oh, I see, he said, sounding slightly confused. All right. I'll let her know. I hung up, shaking my head. Of course, Haley had given him my number. She probably assumed I'd cave eventually. Not this time. Desperation knocks literally. A few days after that, I heard a knock on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, but when I opened it, there she was, Haley. Gone was the confident, entitled version of my sister. She looked frazzled, her eyes puffy like she'd been crying. Liam, she started, her voice trembling. Please, we need to talk. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. Talk about what? I can't do this on my own, she said softly, her bravado completely gone. I'm gonna lose my apartment. I don't have anywhere to go. I should have felt bad. Maybe a part of me did, but I was too drained to let guilt take over. Not my problem, Haley, I said, my voice calm but firm. Her eyes widened. You're seriously going to let me get evicted? Yes, I said without hesitation. You're an adult, Haley. It's time you start acting like one. The moment she realized I was done, she shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting around like she was trying to find the right words. I didn't mean everything I said at dinner, she whispered. I was just upset. Upset? I raised an eyebrow. You called me a failure, Haley, after everything I did for you. And now you're here because things aren't going your way? Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't budge. Please, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what to do. I took a step forward, lowering my voice. Figure it out, I said softly. I did. Her tears spilled over, but I didn't let it sway me. You used me, Haley, I continued, for years. And I let you, but not anymore. It's time for you to stand on your own 2 feet. Her lower lip quivered. Liam, I'm scared. I sighed, the tiniest sliver of compassion tugging at me. Then maybe it's time to grow up. She didn't say anything after that. She just stood there for a moment, tears streaming down her face, before finally turning and walking away. The aftermath begins. I wish I could say that was the end of it. But Haley, she wasn't done trying to play the victim. She turned to social media, painting herself as the abandoned sister whose cold-hearted brother left her to fend for herself. Her posts were dripping with passive-aggressive jabs. Some people forget what family means. It's amazing how quickly people can turn their backs on you. When you have no one left, you realize who truly cares. Her friends ate it up, showering her with sympathy and comments like, "You deserve better, and I'm here for you, babe." I couldn't help but laugh. If only they knew the full story. But the best part? Her attempts to crowdsource sympathy money through a GoFundMe. Facing eviction and financial hardship, she wrote. Just trying to get back on my feet after being abandoned by those I trusted. I almost choked on my coffee when I saw it. The donations? A whopping $75 after a week. Apparently people weren't as eager to fund her lifestyle as she thought. And just like that, reality started hitting Haley harder than ever. Weeks passed, and for the first time in a long while, my life felt normal. No late-night requests for money. No guilt-laden calls from my mom. No texts from Haley begging for a little extra to cover her spa day or whatever unnecessary luxury she decided she couldn't live without. But that peace? It didn't last. It was only a matter of time before the weight of her choices came crashing down. The GoFundMe flop, Haley's GoFundMe, had been an absolute disaster. I mean, $75? That was barely enough for a tank of gas, let alone to cover her rent. Her friends commented with sympathy and sad emojis, but none of them were actually willing to put their money where their mouths were. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she was furious. Apparently, she'd expected her followers to swoop in and save her from the mess she'd created. But people are quick to offer sympathy online, much slower when it comes to opening their wallets. And the eviction notice? It hit her doorstep faster than she could refresh her Instagram feed. Home sweet home. Or not, with no other options. Haley had to move back home. And let me tell you, that didn't go over well. My parents were already tight on space. They downsized a few years back after I moved out, figuring they didn't need all that room anymore. So, having Haley back? It wasn't the homecoming she had imagined. She's been driving us crazy, my dad grumbled when he called me out of the blue one evening. She acts like she's still living in that apartment, complaining about the Wi-Fi, whining about the food, and don't even get me started on how she's treating your mom. I bit back a sarcastic comment. Shocking. Who could have seen that coming? She doesn't lift a finger around here, he continued, his frustration bubbling over. And she has the nerve to complain about the way we live? Says she can't focus in this environment. Maybe she should try focusing on getting a job, I muttered. Don't I know it? Dad sighed. But she refuses. Says she's too stressed to think about that right now. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. The silence was enough for him to realize exactly what I was thinking. When parents finally break, a month went by, then 2, and slowly my parents' patience wore thin. The cracks started showing. She's not the same girl we sent off to college, my mom admitted in a rare moment of honesty. Her voice was softer, almost defeated. She's entitled, like she thinks the world owes her something. Wonder where she got that idea, I said dryly, unable to hold back. Mom didn't respond right away, but I could tell she knew exactly what I was implying. They had enabled her behavior for so long that Haley genuinely believed she was above struggling like the rest of us. Liam, Mom said after a long pause, her voice quieter now. We need your help. And there it was, the moment I'd been waiting for. The final plea. Help with what, exactly? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Haley's maxed out her credit cards, Mom admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. She used our names to open a couple of them, and now the payments are piling up. I closed my eyes, feeling my jaw clench. She did what? My voice was calm, but the anger bubbling beneath was impossible to ignore. She swore she'd pay them off, Mom continued, her voice shaky now. But she hasn't, and the interest is growing. Your dad and I, we can't cover it. How much? I asked, my tone flat. Almost 12 grand, she whispered. I had to sit down. $12,000. Not on rent or essentials, no. This was on designer bags, weekend getaways, and overpriced lattes. And now, they wanted me to step in and clean up her mess. Again, I can't do this, Mom, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I won't. Liam, please, she begged. We don't know what else to do. Then maybe, I said, my voice hardening, it's time for Haley to face the consequences of her actions. Standing my ground, the silence on the line stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Liam, my mom finally said, her tone now laced with desperation. She's your sister. No, I said, my voice firm but calm. She's a grown woman who's been given every opportunity, and she threw it all away because she thought someone else would clean up the mess. I'm done. But what if she... Mom, I cut her off gently. I love you and Dad, but I'm not sacrificing my life again. I can't. Her voice trembled. We don't know how to handle this. Maybe it's time she figures that out, I said quietly. The same way I had to. There was nothing left to say after that. I could feel her disappointment, her heartbreak. but I wasn't going to let guilt drag me back into that cycle. The collapse of a queen. It didn't take long for the walls around Haley's perfect little world to come crashing down. Without me footing the bill, and with my parents stretched thin, her lifestyle crumbled. The credit card companies weren't sympathetic. Late payments led to penalties. Her credit score plummeted. The influencer lifestyle she'd built on social media quickly unraveled as her so-called friends disappeared the moment the freebies stopped. Word spread through the family, and even the aunts and uncles who used to dote on Haley weren't buying her sob stories anymore. It was like watching a train wreck in slow motion, and for once, I wasn't the one trying to stop it. Reality bites hard. Haley eventually found a part-time job at a local boutique, a far cry from the glamorous life she had envisioned. And she hated it. She complained constantly about the hours, the customers, the unfair pay. But guess what? I didn't care. For the first time in her life, she was learning what it felt like to actually work for something. My parents tried to shield her for as long as they could, but even they had limits. They couldn't afford to bail her out forever. Eventually, even they stopped enabling her. And Haley? She was forced to adapt, slowly. Closure. At last, months went by. Life for me, it was good. I was finally saving up again. I even put a deposit down on a small house, a dream I had shelved for years while carrying Haley's weight. One afternoon, while I was organizing my new place, I heard a soft knock at the door. I opened it, and there she was, Haley. But she wasn't the same girl who used to call me only when she needed money. She looked different, humble, tired. "Liam," she said quietly, her eyes barely meeting mine. "Can we talk?" I studied her for a moment. Part of me wanted to slam the door and walk away, but another part, the part that still remembered the sister I used to know, decided to listen. "Come in," I said softly. She stepped inside, and for the first time in a long time, we talked, really talked. She apologized, not the half-hearted, manipulative kind. A real apology. She admitted she had taken advantage of me, of Mom and Dad, of everyone. "I didn't realize how bad it had gotten," she whispered, her voice breaking, "until it was too late." "Yeah," I said softly. "It was." We sat in silence for a while after that. There was no magic fix, no sudden reconciliation, but maybe, just maybe, it was a start. Final reflection, my peace, my life. Even after that conversation, I didn't immediately let Haley back into my life. I was cautious, guarded, and I had every right to be, but I was no longer angry. I had finally learned that boundaries weren't cruel. They were necessary. My parents, they eventually stopped blaming me. I think they realized how much damage they had done by enabling her for so long. And Haley? She was still figuring things out slowly, painfully, but at least she was trying. As for me, I was living my life on my terms. And for the first time in years, I felt free. I had finally learned that sometimes, the best thing you can do for someone is let them fall. Because only then do they realize how far they've drifted, and maybe, just maybe, they'll finally learn how to stand on their own.